This company installs batteries in people's homes, and somehow, investors decided it's worth $4 billion. You're watching TaBIS, a technology and business innovation studio. We study how systems emerge, scale, fail, and endure. Let's get back. Why was Base Power valued at $4 billion at Series C? Not a software company, not a traditional utility, not even a large-scale power developer. Base Power installs batteries in individual homes, small physical devices that most people associate with backup power, not billion-dollar valuations. Yet, investors looked at this company and decided it belonged in the same valuation category as infrastructure platforms. This video explains why that decision makes sense once you understand how valuation works in energy systems. This is a valuation narrative about time, permission, and infrastructure. Base Power installs batteries in individual homes, not power plants, not factories, not transmission lines. At first glance, this makes the valuation feel almost absurd. Home batteries are small, they are distributed, they look insignificant compared to the massive assets that usually dominate energy markets, and yet investors valued the company at roughly $4 billion. So the real question is not whether Base Power is a good company. The real question is, what exactly are investors valuing? This is not a product explanation. It's not a chemistry discussion. It's not a revenue projection walkthrough. This video explains how valuation narratives are constructed in infrastructure using Base Power as a concrete example. Infrastructure valuation follows very different rules than software or consumer technology. Once you understand those rules, the valuation stops looking mysterious and starts looking deliberate. Most people believe valuation comes from familiar ingredients, revenue growth, margins, technology differentiation. That intuition works well in software, but it breaks down in energy infrastructure. In infrastructure markets, the most important constraints often never show up in spreadsheets. They are not technical, they are not financial, they are institutional, and misunderstanding those constraints leads to completely wrong conclusions about value. Here's the frame break. In infrastructure, valuation is not primarily driven by capital. Capital is abundant. The scarcest resource is something else entirely. Permission to move, permission to build, permission to connect, permission to operate, and permission takes time. This is the variable that dominates infrastructure economics. Utility-scale energy assets face enormous institutional friction. Multi-year interconnection queues, permitting delays, regulatory reviews, political veto points. Even perfectly financed projects can remain frozen for years. Capital sits idle, waiting for approval. This is why time, not money, becomes the true bottleneck in energy infrastructure. The longer an asset waits, the worse its economics become, regardless of how good the technology is. Now compare that with residential batteries. Utility-scale batteries are large, centralized, slow to approve, and slow to connect. Residential batteries are small, distributed, permitted by default, and installed immediately. There is no multi-year queue. There is no centralized approval process. This difference has nothing to do with battery chemistry or performance. It is purely institutional. And institutional differences shape valuation far more than technical ones. This leads to the core insight. Base Power is not selling batteries. They are selling speed through the grid. They convert thousands of small, permissionless installations into deployable electrical capacity. This is not just an efficiency gain. It is a time arbitrage embedded inside the energy system, and time arbitrage is extremely valuable in infrastructure markets. One home battery is insignificant. It cannot move markets, it cannot stabilize the grid, but 10,000 home batteries coordinated become something else entirely. A dispatchable resource, a reliability asset, a grid service provider. An ant is weak. An ant colony reshapes ecosystems. Scale changes the nature of the asset. This is what a virtual power plant really is. Many small assets, owned or controlled by one operator, dispatched as if they were one power plant. The grid does not care where electrons come from. It only cares when they arrive. Coordination is what transforms fragmented hardware into infrastructure, and that coordination is what makes valuation possible. Base Power does not merely install batteries, they own the assets. Ownership changes everything. It allows coordinated dispatch. It allows long-term revenue stacking. It allows financial structuring. This shifts the company from an installer model, which produces one-time margins, to an infrastructure ownership model, which produces durable cash flows. This is the moment the business becomes financeable at scale. Each battery participates in multiple value streams: capacity payments, grid services, peak shaving, resilience value, energy arbitrage. Individually, these revenues are small. Collectively, they are predictable. Predictability is what infrastructure investors care about. This is how distributed hardware turns into a stable economic asset. Wall Street does not love innovation. Wall Street loves durable cash flows. It loves asset-backed revenue. It loves financeable structures. Once base power looks like infrastructure, with owned assets, coordinated control, and predictable returns, traditional valuation logic reappears. At that point, the company becomes legible to institutional capital. This model allows asset-by-asset scaling. Deployment is repeatable, expansion is modular, capital can be recycled. When assets deploy faster, capital compounds faster. Speed amplifies return. And in infrastructure, faster compounding is extraordinarily rare. That rarity drives valuation. Investors are not pricing batteries. They are pricing regulatory bypass, deployment velocity, control over distributed capacity. This is time compression applied to physical infrastructure. It is the ability to move faster than the grid was designed to allow. That is the real asset. Most public analyses stop too early: cost per kilowatt hour, installation economics, customer acquisition. Those models miss the deeper layers: capital stack engineering, dispatch rights, failure modes, regulatory asymmetries. This is where valuation diverges sharply from public narratives, and this is where infrastructure judgment matters. At this point, the valuation math diverges from public models. Beyond this point, the discussion is no longer fully public, not because it is secret, but because it requires operator-level understanding. That is where we stop, deliberately. TaBIS publishes deep dive analyses and reports for founders, operators, and capital allocators working at the edge of energy infrastructure. Some TaBIS research is produced for a narrower audience due to depth, sensitivity, or strategic context. If you are building or financing virtual power plants, this is where the real work begins.